Everyone laughed when the CEO mocked the janitor in front of the board, but no one was laughing when the janitor pulled out the letter. It was just past 9 a.m. when the glass doors to Carter and Bryce Enterprises swung open and the entire 14th floor buzzed with activity. Today was the most critical pitch meeting of the year. The boardroom was filled with executives, shareholders, potential investors, and one man holding a mop. Daniel. Daniel, the janitor, had worked quietly in the background for the past 7 years. Always punctual, always polite, and always ignored. Most staff barely knew his name. But to Daniel, every creaky chair, dusty shelf, and stained carpet told a story. Stories he kept tucked away while scrubbing floors others refused to look down at. CEO Maxwell Gray entered the room with his signature swagger, fixing his cufflinks and barking orders. The room stood still as he approached the head of the table, throwing a quick glance at Daniel, who was wiping a spill near the coffee station. "Can we get the janitor out of here?" Maxwell said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is a boardroom, not a bus station." A few people chuckled. Daniel paused, mop still in hand. He didn't look up, but his hand went into his back pocket slowly. No one noticed. Yet. The presentation began. Maxwell strutted across the room, flashing slides of projected growth, international expansion, and profit margins. But the energy in the room started to shift. The numbers were impressive, but the energy was off. The investors exchanged glances, bored and disconnected. Then, as Maxwell bragged about visionary leadership, a quiet voice interrupted from the side. "I believe you missed something, Mr. Gray," Daniel said, stepping forward, holding a single white envelope. The room froze. Maxwell turned, blinking. "Excuse me?" Daniel stepped forward and handed him the envelope. "This was addressed to you, but it was mailed to me." The room grew quiet. Maxwell hesitated, then opened it. As his eyes scanned the paper, his confident smirk slowly faded. Daniel looked at the room and said, "You may not know me, but 10 years ago I was one of you. I graduated top of my class, co-founded a startup, and sold it before I turned 30. Then my brother died, and I walked away from everything to raise his son." Murmurs rippled through the room. Maxwell was still frozen, staring at the letter. "I took this janitor job to stay close to that boy's school. I kept quiet because I didn't want pity. But today, I had to speak, because that letter you're holding isn't just a story, it's a proposal." Now people leaned in. Maxwell's hands trembled as he flipped to the second page. It was a product design, simple, clean, and revolutionary. Attached was a patent. Daniel's name was on it. The investors were no longer glancing at Maxwell. They were staring at Daniel. And then the first man stood up and clapped. Maxwell stood paralyzed, eyes darting between the letter and the faces of the stunned executives. He tried to speak, but his throat felt dry. It wasn't just a patent. It was the exact product concept they'd been struggling to develop for over a year. Daniel had cracked it. Alone, quietly, while mopping their floors. Daniel didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply stood there, straight-backed and calm, holding nothing but his silence. The same man Maxwell had just humiliated was now the center of every conversation in that boardroom. An investor leaned forward, curious. "Mr. Daniel, is this functional? Has it been prototyped?" Daniel nodded once. "Yes. I've been testing it with a private tech incubator downtown. They've offered to buy in, but I wanted to bring it here first, out of respect for my late brother, who once worked with Mr. Gray. Thought loyalty still counted for something." Maxwell turned pale. The investors were no longer interested in him. Another hand shot up, this time from Ms. Calderon, one of the company's most influential shareholders. "Why haven't we seen this before? How did he get the opportunity to do this while working?" "Here." Daniel shrugged. Nights, weekends, time people spend trying to forget their lives. I spent building something. I wasn't invisible. I was just underestimated. There was a shift in the room, a quiet kind of awe. Maxwell, red-faced and clearly rattled, tried to salvage control. This is absurd. He's a janitor. He has built something none of your teams could, Calderon interrupted sharply, and showed more professionalism in 10 minutes than you have all morning. The tension snapped like a whip. A young executive quietly brought Daniel a chair. Another passed him a bottle of water. Without a word, Daniel sat down at the very table he'd been cleaning just minutes ago. For the first time in his life, Maxwell felt irrelevant. One of the older board members looked at Daniel. Tell us more, not just the product, your story. How did we miss this? Daniel leaned forward and began to speak, not about the mop, or his uniform, or the humiliation, but about vision, purpose, legacy. He spoke with clarity, humility, and the kind of leadership money can't buy. And in that moment, Maxwell realized the worst part. He wasn't just being replaced, he was being forgotten. Daniel didn't try to sound impressive. He didn't need to. As he spoke, the boardroom leaned in. Not out of obligation, but curiosity. His ideas weren't just innovative, they were human, rooted in real problems people faced every day. I didn't grow up with much, Daniel said calmly, but my brother taught me something before he passed. No idea is small if it can change someone's life. I took that seriously. So, while cleaning offices, I listened, I watched. I took notes on problems I heard executives complain about. His voice was calm, but the emotion behind it was unmistakable. You all wanted a solution for the system that breaks down under heavy data load. I lived through the noise and the mess your engineers left behind at 2 a.m. I saw the problems you missed. That's how I built the fix. One of the senior engineers, who hadn't spoken all meeting, suddenly nodded. I actually think his method makes sense. It's elegant, smarter than anything we've proposed. Maxwell looked like he might explode. So what? Now we hand the company to a janitor? No, Calderon replied. We hand the opportunity to someone who earned it. Then she turned to Daniel. Would you consider joining us in a formal role, not just as an employee, as a partner? The room hushed. Daniel looked around, at the faces that had ignored him, mocked him, overlooked him. He wasn't bitter, but he wasn't afraid either. I didn't come here for a title. I came to prove to myself that I mattered, that my work mattered, he said. But if this company wants to build something real, with people who are seen and heard, I'll stay. Not to clean your floors, but to help you clean your vision. It was the most powerful statement made all morning. Maxwell finally broke. You're making a mistake. He doesn't belong here. Daniel glanced at him, not with anger, but with an almost sympathetic calm. You're right, Daniel said softly. I didn't belong here, but neither did you. It struck like thunder. As the board dismissed Maxwell, the room didn't cheer. They just moved on, without him. He walked out of the room, forgotten, small, and irrelevant in a building he once ruled. And Daniel? He remained seated, but everything about him had changed. From invisible to unstoppable, weeks passed. Daniel no longer wore the janitor's uniform. Instead, he wore a simple shirt and jacket, always modest but confident. The office that once barely acknowledged his presence now paused when he entered. Not out of fear, but respect. He walked through the same corridors, past the same desks, but now with people greeting him, nodding with genuine warmth. The security guard gave him a fist bump. A young intern asked for advice. Even Calderon, the sharp and seasoned executive, often turned to him for insight before a major decision. Yet Daniel never let the moment consume him. He stayed back late, not because he had to, but because he wanted to make things better. He checked on the night staff, left handwritten notes for the cleaners, and still refilled the vending machine when no one else did. One day, a small group of interns whispered in the break room, laughing quietly as one pointed toward the company's annual innovation trophy. "That used to be Maxwell's thing," one said. Daniel overheard them but just smiled. "Let it be everyone's thing now," he said. "No gatekeepers, just door openers." But it wasn't until the next board meeting that everything truly came full circle. Calderon began. "We've had many strong quarters, but nothing has impacted our culture and growth like what Daniel has brought. Innovation, sure, but also humility, clarity, and direction." She turned to him. "Would you do the honors?" Daniel stood, a bit unsure, then walked to the front. He pressed a button, and the screen lit up. Not with a graph, not with a projection, but with a photograph, a janitor's cart. "I keep this photo on my desk," Daniel said, his voice steady. "Not to remind myself of where I was, but of who I always was. The difference between then and now? You finally listened." He paused. "Talent doesn't always come dressed the way you expect. And sometimes the most brilliant ideas are swept up and thrown away, simply because no one saw where they came from." There was a silence in the room, the kind that lingers after a truth too big to ignore. He stepped back, and as the board rose to give him a standing ovation, not just for his work, but for the reminder of what they'd almost missed, Daniel didn't smile out of pride. He smiled because he had proven something that needed to be said. Everyone matters. You just have to see them.